are here again in Hollywood, a town filled with so much history, pleasure, and pain. But in this episode of History Street Smarts, we will now be exploring the man who many called his estate the first tourist attraction known in Hollywood. The star of this episode is Paul De Longpre, the famous French painter. When I first saw this street name, I was immediately intrigued with it. It was around the Academy Archives, which I frequented many times in my college days, which will be featured in another video. Paul De Longpre was a famous French painter who was known for his beautiful portraits of flowers using a variety of different mediums, such as oil and watercolor. He was born in Lyon, France in 1855, and as a boy, he always was fascinated with the arts. He was entirely self-taught and would practice decorating on different silks and fans, showcasing his immense talent. At the age of 21, he had his first showcase of his art at the Paris Salon, which was a well-renowned art exhibition. Paul was gaining wide recognition for his work. He married a talented seamstress named Josephine. They had 3 children named Alice, Blanche, and Pauline. Paul was living a great life until a bad investment resulted in him losing most of his money, which caused him to reconsider his options. In 1890, he was invited to America to do some commission work, so he decided to move to New York. To regain his finances back on track, he decided to hold some exhibitions. In 1896, he was able to display his work once again, as well as working in advertisements, which was bringing a new level of success. He would occasionally go over to nearby New Jersey to paint some floral spectacles. He realized that the city did not have a collection of exotic flowers to paint from, as well as a health scare made him decide to move to Los Angeles with his wife and 3 children to restart his creativity. Paul arrived in Los Angeles in 1897, which revived his passion. He was able to find so many different flowers to paint from. His presence in Los Angeles brought such excitement. After being established in the West Adams area, he was also seen bicycling through many Los Angeles suburbs. One day, he then stumbled upon the small town of Hollywood. Delongpre had befriended people such as Frenchman René Blondeau, famous founder of Blondeau Tavern, and J.F. Grass, an early Hollywood crop and business developer who had recommended he move to Hollywood. Paul then held an art exhibit, where he met co-founder of Hollywood, Dada Wilcox. Paul was interested in moving to Hollywood, which she was eager to bring him to her town. She wanted to bring some more culture to the city. She then gave Paul the former site where her own home was on the corner of Cahuenga and Prospect Boulevard, which would later be Hollywood Boulevard. In 1901, his house was completed by famed architect Louis Bourgeois, which included a studio and a guest house and a gallery space to give Paul a chance to sell his paintings to the public. Paul eventually found his estate too small to have a large garden, so in exchange for more land, he gifted 3 beautiful paintings to Wilcox. Since Paul painted flowers and not nudes, this satisfied Mrs. Wilcox on a morality level. With the notoriety Paul brought, plus the news of his famous home having a beautiful garden, his home helped put Hollywood in the public consciousness when it came to a tourist destination. This new route was actually brought to town by a man named Charles M. Pierce. He wanted to introduce more people to the area. So working alongside with the Los Angeles Pacific Railroad, he developed a special line called the Balloon Line, as the route was shaped like a balloon. This was another way to advertise land development in Los Angeles. What eventually became the most popular stop was Delongpre's estate, with a beautiful garden, an estate which had at its peak about 8,000 people visiting his estate a month. Visitors were not only able to speak with Paul, but purchase beverages and purchase prints of his artwork, which would bring additional income. This proved vital as guests were learning more about the city of Hollywood, as well as having a chance to see the studio of a renowned painter and celebrity. The beautiful estate even appeared in the first film shot in Hollywood, called Love Among the Roses, directed by D.W. Griffith and starring a young Mary Pickford. With the publicity of the Delongpre estate, people started moving out to Los Angeles. He was so generous with his love for the city, as well as connecting with a wide array of people. Unfortunately, there are those who take advantage of that kindness. There was an array of thefts that happened in his house with some of the tours. He started restricting access to his house, which of course started contributing to his failing health. He started focusing his attention on how the government should always fund the arts. On June 29, 1911, Paul De Longpre died of cancer. Now with an estate so big, his widow Josephine was not sure what to do at first. Louis Blondeau convinced her and her eldest daughter that they should sell some property off as commercial buildings. They also decided to separate the house into apartments in 1919. The family eventually moved back to France, leaving the house and some paintings unsold. Eventually, the house was demolished in 1927 to eventually make way for the Warner Brothers Hollywood Theater. Without Paul De Longpre, people would have taken a longer time discovering Hollywood as a tourist or even a filming destination. In 1913, they renamed Wilson Street to Delongpre Avenue in his honor for his contribution to Hollywood history. At the corner of Delongpre and Cherokee, there is this park simply named the Delongpre Park. The park, built in 1924, was a beautiful space that actually was once a housing development. According to the LA Times, 9 small buildings will be sold at auction at 10 o'clock next Wednesday morning at Cherokee Street and Delongpre Avenue. With this property, there was a beautification project land developers wanted for the area, which resulted in the residents needing to move their homes. The park, of course, was named after Paul De Longpre, one of the earliest residents of Hollywood, who helped contribute to the tourism of the city. When the Arts Commission of the city decided to add a fountain to the park, they wanted to also add a piece of art onto it as well. They decided upon a statue which was named Aspiration, designed by artist Roger Noble Burnham, who also designed Spirit of Troy at USC. This statue, Aspiration, was supposed to be a homage to the iconic silent movie star Rudolph Valentino. Valentino became one of the most iconic and important silent movie stars in the entire world. Born in Italy and later immigrated to the United States for a better life, Valentino quickly climbed the ranks of success with iconic roles such as The Sheik and 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Valentino brought such magnetism with every performance, and at the peak of his career, he passed away at the age of 31 from an infected ulcer. His death shook Hollywood and the entire country at its core. Since Valentino was so young, this only brought eternal immortality. His funeral brought out hundreds of people to pay him some respect, including an almost fainting Pola Negri. A couple of years later, the everlasting memory of Valentino was fresh in people's minds. Many in Hollywood wanted a statue somewhere in the city to commemorate his memory and legacy. And after much searching, Valentino's manager George Alleman, who also ran his estate, contacted city officials to create a statue for Valentino. After securing the funds for the statue, they decided to go along with it under one caveat, that the statue does not look like the deceased actor, but represents Valentino's aura instead. Some people argued that a statue of Paul De Longpre should have been erected instead, especially since the park was named after him. There was a gentleman who claimed to have not been notified prior of who was going to be the subject of the erected statue. It was explained by Miss Elizabeth Black, secretary, found that Herman E. Bennett had not been consulted on the matter. The first he knew of it, he was reading a newspaper telling about the unveiling. There is only room for one statue in Delongpre Park. That is for Mr. De Longpre, an artist and gentleman. Despite this controversy, the unveiling still moved forward. The Arts Commission felt they needed something to improve the park, and it needed a fountain anyhow, and this provides one. The statue is a mere side issue to the fountain. Now with the statue in place, there has to also be a larger-than-life person presenting it. The actress who was chosen to unveil this statue was Dolores Del Rio, who many have called the female Rudolph Valentino, or the female Latin lover. She gladly accepted, as she personally knew Valentino. On May 5, 1930, about 300 people arrived at the Delongpre Park to witness the unveiling of the brand new statue. Dolores Del Rio pulled the curtain to reveal a beautiful Art Deco style of statue, showcasing a man looking up to the sky, mounted onto a sphere called Aspiration. Under the sphere is a block which reads, "Erected in memory of Rudolph Valentino, 1895 to 1926. Presented by his friends and admirers from every walk of life, in all parts of the world, in appreciation of the happiness brought to them by his cinema portrayals." Del Rio gave a speech about the unveiling, which was announced over radio. She even presented the speech in more than one language, including English, Spanish, and French, to various newsreels, stating, "I will always cherish the honor of having been chosen to represent my fellow players in unveiling the memorial to Rudolph Valentino. The memory of this great artist still lives with us. We, of the motion picture profession, look upon him as the guiding light of our ideals." The artist of the statue, Roger Noble Burnham, described his sculpture as a torch lighting the world with fire of romance. Shortly after the ceremony, this beautiful oasis-looking park with the beautiful statue made an appearance in the Three Stooges short Hoi Polloi, released in 1935. The Stooges are taking some dancing lessons, hysterically of course. The dance instructor has a bee crawl down her back, which causes her to spaz out and make the Stooges follow suit. She then throws herself out of the window, and everyone lands in the Delongpre fountain. Here you see the Aspiration statue. On one of Valentino's anniversaries, one of his press agents wanted to perform some kind of publicity stunt. Approaching the cemetery was a strange truck. In it was an Arabian horse with red shoes standing on some type of oriental rug. According to the LA Times, the horse was Jaden, Valentino's famous mount, from the W.K. Kellogg Arabian Horse Ranch at Pomona, coming to pay tribute to his master. "Stop that horse!" the directors ordered. "But why?" asked the slight man. "I was told—" "Get that horse out of the cemetery. We are not having any press agent stunts here." Jaden ended up being taken to the Delongpre Park to pose by the Valentino statue, to pose for the photographers. The press agent was pretty sad about his great stunt going awry. Throughout the years, the Delongpre Park has had some controversy. One of the earliest post-statue issues happened with a woman named Zunilda Mancini. She was one of the contributors of the Aspiration statue, who claimed that she contributed $6,900, but then discovered that the construction was way less than that what she contributed with. She was asking for a return of $4,900. George Alleman, who controlled Valentino's estate, claimed to have spent all the money and more. This was eventually settled out in the Superior Court. Over the years, Delongpre Park has always had a more sinister side to it. Some called it even sketchy over the years. As early as 1935, the same year with the lawsuit and Three Stooges short, a girl who was found drugged in the park had died on June 17, 1935. According to the LA Times, She had been chloroformed, she had been attacked, and she appeared to be afflicted, apparently between 17 and 19 years of age. When found, she wore a yellow silk dress, brown leather jacket, and gray and black pumps. They were never able to determine if the girl was placed in the park or if she was afflicted at the park. On a lighter note, the Delongpre Park has always been a place where fundraisers like having Thanksgiving dinners to help the needy or community events took place. In 1947, the City Recreation and Park Department sponsored a pet show where kids were able to showcase them. Entries included a number of dogs, several sleepy cats, turtles, lovebirds, and a white mouse decked out with a plaid ribbon. One of the kids posed with his bulldog to show a more innocent moment at this park. During the 1960s and 70s, the city of Hollywood was having a slump, which would also leak into the Delongpre Park as well. It was starting to be known as a place where drug dealers would meet and purchase drugs. The Aspiration statue was even vandalized, which made the city remove it for about 20 years. By the late 1970s, residents in the community were getting fed up with the condition of the once beloved park, and it had become somewhat of an eyesore, not fit for proud display. Residents then decided to take it in their own hands and made the Hollywood Revitalization Committee to initiate a revamp for the park, which included placing the Aspiration statue back in the park. They raised about $40,000 to add benches, update the lights, beautify the landscape, add trash bins, walkways installed. In July 1979, a brand new bust of Rudolph Valentino was installed and was paid for by the estate of one of his fans to also help improve the park. The only way these improvements were to be noticed is to remove the bigger elephant in the room, the crime in the area. The Delongpre Park Association decided to push the Los Angeles Police Department into bringing more patrol cars in that area. Surveillance was also added and supported in the community. One guy who would sometimes serve as this community surveyor was Warren Jason. He witnessed a suspicious-looking character walking through the neighborhood and eventually the park and yelled, "Get off the corner!" The man stared back silently for a moment, then shrugged and walked away. He's out there every day in broad daylight. Him and all his dope-selling buddies. This neighborhood is just a marijuana supermarket. Throughout the day, their deals would go through, transactions completed, and transients just causing mischief. Fortunately, by the mid-1980s, the park was one of the targets for the city's Community Redevelopment Agency. Crackdowns were set up all throughout the area, arrests being made, and raids being conducted, especially in a place called Drug Alley, which was on Delongpre Avenue. One of the potential solutions was to use eminent domain, which is where the government can seize people's property, pay homeowners market value of their property to redevelop any area. This brought huge controversy to the area, which would not solve the imminent drug problem in the area. Many agencies were trying to scare the homeowners, especially the senior citizens of the drug problem in the area so they can sell their land for cheap. Luckily, protesters stepped in and the community was in fact an area for rehabilitation and not demolition. In 1988, neighbors joined together to push the drug dealers out of the neighborhood, chanting, "Drug dealers off our streets!" Fathers, mothers, and children marched up, down, and around the blocks surrounding Delongpre Park Friday night, holding candles and flashlights to protect one of the area's most thriving businesses, drug trafficking. This has resulted in many more arrests and more in the community fighting back with increased neighborhood watch groups. This brought such needed unity in the community. This gave hope to the residents that they can kick out all the undesirables in the area and make it safe again. One of the most effective patrol groups call themselves the Sentinels. They will help the community by painting over graffiti, have nightly patrol, especially around abandoned flop houses, and started expanding into other areas, creating Boy and Girl Scout groups to learn about leadership. Rather than think of these night patrols as work, people in the neighborhood made them into socializing meetups. This proved to be successful and improved the area. They were even helping other areas to help out those who were addicts. The biggest takeaway with this park is anything that falls on hard times can be revived with just a little community involvement. People who stay focused and have a common cause for change can accomplish anything. Now, the Delongpre Park has had a sort of revival, even becoming a lovely dog park where families can relax, take a walk, and play in the playground. Something that still remains all these years is the legacy of Rudolph Valentino. Many walk by not knowing how big of a star he is. Next time you visit the park, don't forget to give a nod at one of the most iconic movie stars of all time. Who is the first actor you think of when you see a silent movie? Some actors that may come to mind: Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Rudolph Valentino, Clara Bow? How about Charlie Chaplin? He was probably the first you thought of. In fact, not only is Chaplin the most famous to come out of the silent era, but he is actually one of the most famous actors in the entire world. After his character, the Tramp, gave him worldwide fame and recognition, he not only became extremely wealthy, but with that money, he invested in various buildings in Los Angeles, as well as build his own studio on Delongpre and La Brea. Chaplin actually started his career in England. Born into poverty, he followed the footsteps of his mother by performing on the stage. Because of the lack of a stable home life, he was taken a couple of times from his mother to workhouses, designated as a place to take care of children in poverty. By the time Charlie had turned 14, he had been in and out of these workhouses. In fact, the first time he was handed an orange, he had no idea it was something to eat. Just comparing the fruit against the drab workhouse walls was something Charlie remembered later in his life. He had the daunting task of taking his mother to a type of infirmary which would take care of her depreciated mental state. She had been suffering from psychosis, so she was unable to take care of the young Charlie. His father was an alcoholic that was also unable to take care of him and his half-brother Sidney. One of the bright spots of his young life was that Charlie developed his craft to perform in front of a live audience. With the connections of his father, he was able to join a dancing troupe. He discovered that he had a better knack for telling jokes and being a comedian. He began building the acting credits through various plays, which would eventually lead to the attention of famous vaudeville impresario Fred Karno. His brother Sidney was able to secure a trial run to test out his brother's comedy chops. He was able to secure a spot and become a permanent part of the comedy troupe. His understudy would eventually be Stanley Jefferson, who would change his name into Stan Laurel. Karno chose a group of comedians to tour the United States, and Charlie fell in love with the country and the potential opportunities. He won rave reviews with his pantomime. One of the most famous characters was a drunk called the Inebriate Swell. With his second tour in the States, he was invited to try out for Keystone Pictures, who were famous for their zany films, starring the Keystone Cops, as well as showcasing beautiful starlets in their bathing beauty films. Max Sennett became Charlie's new boss, at first thinking he was too young, but eventually he became one of the most successful comedians at the studio. He even perfected his famous tramp costume at Keystone by trying on contradictory clothes: baggy pants, small bowler hat, etc. Once he figured out his costume, he then thought who this character was. A little man struggling to survive in a hostile world, clinging onto remnants of dignity, always keeping his chin up in the face of adversity. The tramp was born. When he wasn't given the opportunities in the beginning, he decided to use his downtime and learned everything when it came to filmmaking. This would contribute to him knowing his worth as well as knowing his popularity through the world. Chaplin was then lured for more money at the SNA Film Company. In 1914, for $12.50 a week, 1 year later, he was lured to another studio named Mutual, who offered to pay $10,000 a week. Anytime Chaplin went anywhere, he was mobbed. With his new popularity, he wanted to have complete control over the producer of his movies. He signed with Mutual to distribute his newly made films at his new studio. And that studio was born on La Brea, Sunset Boulevard, and Delongpre Avenue. At first, the residents did not want a studio built in the residential area. But Charlie decided to have his studio designed in an English cottage style to appease the nearby neighbors. Charlie purchased this property from a man named R.S. McClellan, who owned acres of orange groves and who had his house on the property. Construction was completed in 1918. At one point, there was even a private residential area on the lot. Charlie never lived there, but his half-brother Sidney and other studio employees did. The beautiful studio had brand new sound stages, a swimming pool, tennis courts, recording studios, film vaults, and horse stables. The first film to come out of his brand new studio was A Dog's Life, being distributed through First National. Other amazing classics come to mind from the studio were The Circus, The Kid, City Lights, and Modern Times. During the production of The Circus, a fire broke out in one of the sound stages which temporarily halted production. Charlie would even utilize his amazing studio as a filming location as well. In the short A Day's Pleasure, the tramp is taking his family to a nice Sunday outing. All of a sudden, the car does not stop. The comedy ensues when the car turned on, as he leaves and turns off when he tries to sit inside. Another fascinating element to the scene is that Charlie used the entrance to his office as the porch of his character's house. Charlie eventually wanted much more control of the production of his film. He was now receiving additional production budget from Mutual. So he, along with Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and director D.W. Griffith, formed United Artists. This gave much better quality control to the actual artists, to which projects they worked on, as well as where it should be distributed to. Richard A. Rowland, the head of Metro Pictures, famously quipped, "The inmates are taking over the asylum." Now Charlie can focus a lot more of his energy on his own projects without having to deal with an outside entity. A revolutionary concept for the time. Throughout the years, Charlie was the sole filmmaker using his lot, as he did not want outsiders to use his facilities. Eventually, productions on his lot slightly opened up by the mid-1940s. The first being called Once Upon a Time, starring Cary Grant. Once thought to be lost, but was found by film historians Leonard Maltin and Janine Basinger for the 1949 screen test of silent movie star Greta Garbo. It was one of several, but this one test was shot on Chaplin Studios in 1949 by cinematographer James Wong Howe. If only these tests would have brought Garbo for a film comeback. At least we see that she still has the ethereal glow the world knew her for. In 1951, a movie named Hollywood Story also used the studio as a backdrop. We see the star of the silent silver screen, Francis X. Bushman, arriving at this fictitious studio.
Yes. Francis X. Bushman. Hello, John. Say, where you been hiding? Why, I've been right... Oh, you're kidding, aren't you? My, it's been a long time. Listen, the last time you were on this lot was to star in Mr. Ferrara's first picture with Beverly Bain.
That's right. Boy, what a memory. Say, John, I'm your casting office.
Oh, right this way.
Well, John, it's good.
Well, if there isn't Betty Blythe and Bill Farnham.
No.
Hello,
no.
Betty.
Oh,
Hello, Francis. How are you?
Fine.
Hey,
Hello, Bill.
Betty. John, glad to see you.
It's the old days. The good
As the studio started opening up a bit, things turned for the worst for Charlie. Over the years, people thought of Charlie as a very political person. He tended to showcase some of his ideals in various films, such as The Great Dictator, in which he satirized Adolf Hitler. Many people considered him communist, especially FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, despite him having ideals only to treat human beings with equality. Not only that, but over the years, Charlie was in relationships with much younger women. One relationship that went extremely sour was with a woman named Joan Barry. Barry later accused Charlie of being the father of her child. Despite Charlie winning the case that proved he wasn't the father, he was still obliged to pay for the child until she turned 18. This gave additional ammo to Hoover to conduct a serious investigation. In 1952, when Charlie was going to London for his premiere of his latest picture, Limelight, upon returning, he learned that his citizenship had been revoked and was not allowed to re-enter back into the country. This left a sense of betrayal for Charlie, so he had to send his wife Una O'Neill to settle any affairs, which included selling his beloved studio. This studio was then sold to a real estate company called Webb and Knapp, who had actually planned to destroy the studio. Luckily, they didn't, so they eventually leased it to become Kling Studios, and slowly was for television production, including filming the original George Reeves Superman series of the 1950s. Then in 1959, comedian Red Skelton started working at the studio, shooting his Red Skelton show. He decided to end up purchasing the studio, but didn't want to play the boss. As he said in the LA Times from 1960, "I'm not the head of the studio. I'll be president and just own the joint." Red added, chomping down a large cigar, "I've got a nice enough racket trying to make people laugh, and I don't intend to foul that up. And besides, that's harder than running a studio." He even opened up the studio for other productions to work on. In 1957, Hanna-Barbera Productions were here temporarily, creating such iconic cartoons as Huckleberry Hound Show, The Quick Draw McGraw Show, The Flintstones, The Jetsons, etc. Skelton didn't own the studio for long, so he eventually sold it to CBS in 1962. Perry Mason was then produced here. Then one of the most famous tenants moved here in 1966, A&M, which comprised of founders Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss. It was their studio from 1966 until 1999. What set apart A&M from every label in town was they did not fit into the typical corporate style. Every musician who would record there will remember the small studio feel and the non-corporate attitude of the studio. When Herb Alpert moved in, they did a couple of renovations to better accommodate the recording studio, including changing the soundstage that was built on a top of a swimming pool into a new recording stage. In 1969, the historic lot was designated as a Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument. In its historic walls, Albert signed up some of the most iconic music acts, including the Carpenters, the Police, Cat Stevens, Supertramp, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, Joe Jackson. When Albert bought the studio, he cherished and appreciated the history that came before him. During the release of the album Whipped Cream and Other Delights, Herb Alpert played a music video paying homage to Charlie Chaplin and the history with the studio.
Do you know the theme from Limelight? Sure, Herb. That's it. You know, that song was written by Charlie Chaplin for a picture he made right here in these studios. Of course, today, the brass and I use this lot for recording studios and offices. But it was Charlie Chaplin who built the lot here many years ago, and he made some of his most famous pictures. You know, I remember the first day I arrived here was really kind of thrilling, because I couldn't help thinking about all the fantastic things that used to happen here so many years ago. I kind of wondered how this old studio that was so used to Limelight was going to take to something like Whipped Cream.
With an army of dancing Chaplins, even some on the roof. What came close to Charlie being connected with Herb Alpert was when he came back to the United States in 1972 to receive his honorary Lifetime Achievement Award. Alpert had thought he wanted to visit the grounds of the old studio, but rather he only drove by his old studio. Only having owned it 20 years, it portrayed perfectly in 1992 film Robert Downey's Chaplin. One of the most iconic musical performances that was actually recorded on the A&M lot was the We Are the World music video. In 1999, the studio was sold once again to the Jim Henson Company, home to the Muppets, and in Sesame Street. The biggest reason why they chose the Chaplin Studio to reform the Muppets was because of its unique architecture and its unusual space. The Muppets did make a connection with it, and in 2011 filmed The Muppets Where Walter is Visited the Abandoned Muppet Studio.
Walter, don't be nervous.
Oh, I know. I just can't believe I'm here. The home of the Muppets.
好像就是这里啊。
What happened to this place?
In December 2024, the Jim Henson Studio was sold again to the musician John Mayer and to television producer John McGinty Nicol. They were already leasing some office spaces at the studio. One of the biggest reasons why the studio was sold was, according to the Jim Henson Company, was as part of a plan to have Jim Henson Co., which makes several children's programs, and Burbank-based Jim Henson's character, shop under one roof. We will only hope that the new owners of this historic lot preserves and cherishes the history of the lot as much as those who came before. One of the most surprising residences I found on Delongpre Avenue was one of the many residences of the legendary silent Western stars, William S. Hart. Located on 8341 Delongpre Avenue sits the once two-story ranch owned by the famous cowboy. Hart's home was built in 1919, making it the oldest remaining residence left on the famous Sunset Strip. He resided here until 1927, when he moved to his much larger property in Newhall. William S. Hart started his film career a lot older than the average actor. He was born on December 6, 1864. Throughout his early life, Hart loved anything that had to do with the Wild West, saying that even his neighbors were Indians, in which he would, as a kid, play with the Sioux Indians, pick up on their language. His mother and father both had health scares, including his father nearly losing his sight, and his mother having several difficult childbirths. One of these childbirths would result in Will's sister having mental challenges that would plague her for the rest of her life. His father was a machinist, which would result in the family needing to move around a lot. This caused for his parents to be separated for a while. This left Will to be left unsupervised and learn how to keep himself entertained. One of his favorite pastimes was riding horses, fishing, spending time with local farmers, befriending Civil War veterans, outlaws, gold prospectors, anyone who fits the mold of the average Western person. These early childhood tribulations formed Will's mind to what projects he would eventually want to work on. After the death of his sibling Nicholas Jr., the crippling accident of his father, and the further health problems of his mother, Will stepped up and helped his family by picking up small jobs to support everyone. In his free time, he would attend performances of New York's many theaters. This then planted the acting bug in young William S. Hart. As his father was able to recover and get a job as an engineer, he encouraged Will to pursue his interest in acting. He traveled to England for a bit, but became homesick and decided to sign up for some acting lessons. He then started picking up some acting work on stage. Finally, in 1905, he was cast in the play The Squaw Man. This brought him attention and success, which carried him over to his next title in The Virginian in 1907. More Western roles followed, and he decided to take his chances and move to California to make films based on these Western roles. He decided to form a film company called New York Motion Picture Company, in which he was put in touch by once roommate filmmaker Thomas Ince. At first, Ince tried to convince Will he should step away from Westerns, but decided to make him an actor as well as a director so he can get comfortable being around a camera. Hart insisted in creating his own films, and feeling that the offers other than a director were not coming through, he went out back east to act on the stage again. Upon moments of desperation and not receiving work, he received a telegram from Thomas Ince asking him to star and direct in his new picture. Hart accepted, and he moved back to California with his dog Mac and his sister Mary Ellen. The bargain was a huge success and made William S. Hart a household name. Ince then partnered with Mac Sennett, D.W. Griffith, and Harry Atkin to form Triangle Film Corporation. After Hart felt he was not receiving his fair share from Ince, he moved to Paramount Pictures and sued Ince, which would dissolve his friendship with the director. Hart was finally receiving the salary he deserved. With the salary increase, he was then able to purchase his property on Delongpre Avenue. He moved in 1919. Just a few short years, Hart was working on a picture named John Petticoats, in which he was introduced to a starlet named Winifred Westover, who started her career as an actress with D.W. Griffith. Hart went around town with Westover, taking her to dinners, taking her to shows. Hart fell head over heels for her. Just when Westover was going to sign a 5-year contract with Louis J. Selznick, Hart asked her not to sign until she received a letter from him. Once she received it, it was a marriage proposal from Hart. She gladly accepted, despite their 35-year age gap. Westover and Hart married in the Delongpre cottage on December 7, 1921. There are only a few guests, who included Winifred Westover's mother, Hart's sister Mary Hart, and his attorney James G. Scarborough. Something quite unusual. Winifred was also asked to sign an agreement that she would retire from acting. She moved into the Hart's Delongpre home. But after about 6 months of living with Hart, he asked her to leave. At the time, she was pregnant with Hart's son. She ended up moving with her mother in Santa Monica. Many have questioned the main reason why Will asked Winifred to leave, but many conclude it was because of Will's sister, who was mentally challenged. Winifred testified one of the biggest reasons was because Will insisted that they keep their bedroom door open that was used to separate his sister's bedroom. He settled with his ex-wife in court with alimony payments as well as leaving a trust for his son Will Jr. Hart stayed at the house with his sister until 1927 when his home in Newhall was completed. By this time, Hart had been retired as his films at this point were not doing so well. Before selling the home, Hart worked with the United Artists. Over time, people lost interest in his pictures and started watching the films of Tom Mix and Hoot Gibson. After Hart's refusal to change his format of his films to make them flashier to appeal to Paramount, he decided to work on what would be his final film, Tumbleweed. After United Artists found the film too long, Hart refused their suggestions to trim it down, which in result affected the distribution of this film. Hart then retired from making films and moved to a new home in Newhall that he commissioned. He died in 1946, leaving behind his amazing estates to the city of Los Angeles. Hart's Delongpre house definitely took on a life of its own after he vacated the property. Hart still retained ownership of the house. It wasn't until after the death of his sister in 1943 where he decided to start getting his belongings in order. In 1944, he decided to donate his Delongpre property, the land around it, and $50,000 in order to contribute to the community. There were a couple of caveats for this. 1, the estate had to be preserved to celebrate the actor. 2, a fountain had to be erected. And 3, to develop a park with the donated property. Hart was always grateful to his fans throughout the years, and he said the biggest reasons why he wanted to donate his properties to the city of Los Angeles: "While I was making pictures, the people gave me their nickels, dimes, and quarters. When I'm gone, I want them to have my home," he once told friends and family. Hart also said, "I would like to say, in all the sincerity of which I am capable, that donating this beautiful spot, my former home, I am only trying to do an act of justice." The 72-year-old actor told a gathering of A-list celebrities and politicians on the front of his Delongpre Avenue estate, "I am only trying to give back to the American public some part of what the American public has already given me." Throughout the years, the property was always something that people didn't know how to handle or take care of, even though William S. Hart had intentions set in his will for it. Few people have predicted how easily certain officials were trying to disregard Hart's wishes on the property. In the 1950s, the Parks Department asked for legal advice to see if it was even obliged to create the park Hart wanted. Of course, the promise of the park had to be kept, but they suggested the fountain was not something they had to erect. This was the beginning of the downfall in the area. The house was mostly left abandoned without much use, often left to vandals. It wasn't until decades later when the city finally listened to his wishes with the development of the park. The reason for the delay was the condition of the actual park itself. When Hart donated it, some say that he had intended to donate it to Los Angeles County, but he accidentally contacted the city instead. So that was the biggest reason some say the investments of the park were delayed. City officials weren't even aware that the house even existed, never being a place of interest for tourists. Los Angeles would rent the house to various tenants, even being used as a recreation center until 1966, when it was occupied by the West Hollywood location for the Actors Studio. They converted into a rehearsal hall, office, which was once Hart's den, and even converted the garage into a theater for performances for students. In 1985, another controversy was thrust upon the house. The owner of what is now the Sunset Tower Hotel, at the time St. James Club, tried to convince the city to tear down the property to allow him to build a multi-level parking garage. By the late 1980s, the house finally received much-deserved renovation, including adding a fountain that Hart had requested in his original will. According to this West Hollywood article, "It's really a fluke that the park's development took this long," said Robert Volkin, a longtime resident who headed the West Hollywood Historical Society at the time. LA didn't care about it. The county wasn't interested, and the immediate neighbors for the most part favored the status quo. More than anything else, it was a case of nobody pushing and nothing getting done. Now this beautiful estate is being taken care of by the city of West Hollywood since 1989. Visitors can see this beautiful dog park, is able to check out this amazing house, and just imagine how much a rural town West Hollywood used to be. There are even staircases that go right into the heart of Sunset Strip. Visitors can take a seat and connect to the past of how this residence was once owned by one of the most famous Western cowboys of the silver screen, William S. Hart. Some may say you can't even get any bigger of a celebrity than learning about the Delongpre residence of William S. Hart, but there's another notable celebrity who once lived on 5124 Delongpre Avenue. Author and poet Charles Bukowski lived here from 1963 to 1971. He had a job working at the post office as a mail carrier and clerk. In this residence, he wrote a majority of his short stories and books. John Martin, who was his first publisher, suggested he quit his job to finish his novel, and so he did. He then published his first book, Post Office, which became a huge success. This building was discovered on a Craigslist ad that it was going to be demolished. Luckily, it was saved, and still is a multi-family residential home with a historical plaque on the outside. Now, let's take a quick peek on some other films that were shot on Delongpre Avenue. In the 1956 film Autumn Leaves, starring Joan Crawford, they used this bungalow called Cedar Courts, 5267 to 5277, Delongpre Avenue. They also used this bungalow across the street, 5234 to 5236, Delongpre Avenue. Paul De Longpre would have never been able to foresee how much Hollywood would change. Now, if you find an original Delongpre painting, it could be worth over $100,000. Comparing where Delongpre lived, it is incredible to see how quickly the city eradicated a more rural Hollywood. Next time you walk around Hollywood Boulevard, never forget the exciting Paul De Longpre house. Could have been your next tourist destination. Thank you for joining me in this episode of History Street Smarts. Don't forget to comment, like, and share with anyone who loves history. Join me in the next episode where we can take a trip back into the San Fernando Valley. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Catch you next time.